Navigating compliance standards, strategies for Caribbean nations in response to FATF and EU designations. Good morning, everyone, and corporate services at the Financial Services Commission, and I am honored to moderate today's high-level discussions. It is exactly in Belize, 10 a.m. Central Time. I know a few of us may have a time difference, so we appreciate your interest in joining us today. Allow me to advise you all that today's webinar will be recorded. Attendees will not have the option, unfortunately, to replay the webinar or download presentations during or after the session. However, a video recording of the webinar will be sent to attendees via separate email by tomorrow. The Financial Services Commission of Belize is hosting today's webinar, Navigating Compliance Standards Strategies for Caribbean Nations in Response to FATF and EU Designations, with the objective that through the presentation and expert discussions, you as participants will explore the following topics: Belize's removal from EU Annex 1 listing, Belize's efforts on meeting CFATF recommendations related to money laundering and terrorist financing, strategies and tools for a sustainable and effective beneficial ownership framework, connecting the dots, the power of technology for ultimate beneficiaries data management, and of course, technical assistance in implementing beneficial ownership transparency. All common topics of interest among us all today. This webinar was organized as a platform for you all as high-level government representatives and stakeholders to address challenges posed by FATF and EU AML CFT tax standards. I will reiterate that the FSC also believes that sharing lessons learned promotes collaboration and enables us as individuals and regulatory bodies to learn from one another and work together to improve and find solutions for common problems that we face as a region. Without further delay, I am honored to introduce our first speaker for today. Mr. Claude Haylack was appointed as Director General and Deputy Chairman of the Financial Services Commission of Belize on September 1st, 2017. In his current role, Mr. Haylack is the Chief Executive Officer of the FSC and is responsible for oversight, regulation, and supervision of the non-bank financial services sector in Belize. He also serves as the Registrar of Companies, Registrar of Merchant Shipping, and the Registrar of numerous other legal entities, including NGOs, NPOs, foundations, and trusts. He will do us the honor of delivering a few welcoming remarks, so I welcome Mr. Haylack.
Thank you very much, Nelda, for that very generous introduction. You have actually set the stage for the discussion this morning and why we're here. So I won't take up much time because I do think we have a number of very interesting presentations ahead of us, and I want us to get to those as quickly as we can because there's some very important information that we want to share. When we first started to discuss this webinar and hosting it, we immediately thought that it'd be a very useful thing, given that Belize's recent experience in navigating various adverse listings could be very beneficial to other jurisdictions and to others to understand the process and the challenges that we face in meeting these largely externally imposed obligations. As well, we also thought it would be useful to talk about some of the very topical things that are impacting financial services and financial centers more recently. And so, you know, we're introducing, are going to spend a lot of time today in talking about beneficial ownership information and how we navigate those, and have experiences shared with us in terms of how other jurisdictions are dealing with it, as well as what potential help that we can get in terms of navigating those issues. And of course, there's the important aspect of how do you bring technology to bear in terms of helping you to navigate those issues. You know, over the last few years, the Caribbean region in particular, including Belize, has been facing significant challenges in addressing AML CFT activities. And this webinar is actually aimed to raise awareness, foster collaboration, and so that we can perhaps come up with some joint actionable solutions to mitigate the impact of these various initiatives, and to further protect the region's financial system, in terms of integrity and soundness. The discussions from the expert presentations today will also address, of course, the economic, financial, and societal impacts of being designated as a high-risk jurisdiction. We will hear today from our internal staff, our Director of Legal and Enforcement here at the FSC. We have someone from the European AML CFT Global Facility who has a lot of experience with this and will be able to share some very useful and important information. And of course, we will have the NRD companies, the CEO of NRD companies, who will also talk about how you can bring technology to bear on this. And NRD, I will add, is a very important partner for the FSC in many of these activities. I will leave it at that, and just again to say welcome, to thank you all for taking the time out to join us today, and we hope that you will have very fruitful discussions, and that you will be able to take away some very important lessons from this webinar. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mr. Halak, for such a heartwarming welcome and for reiterating the purpose and objectives of today's webinar. Before I proceed to introduce our first speaker, I would like to share a few technical specifications with our participants. During the conference, attendees are encouraged to ask questions by typing them in the chat interface. However, responses will be given exclusively during the designated Q&A session that we have in today's agenda. Therefore, at the beginning, right now as we start the webinar, we encourage you guys, when you have questions, to specify the intended recipient or speaker that you would like to address the question. Otherwise, as the moderator, I will designate a speaker to address the question. The webinar, again, I will reiterate, will be recorded. We will be sharing the video recording with you all via email. Just to mention that throughout the webinar, interactive polls may be conducted to gather feedback or opinions from you all. So just look out for those polls as our speakers share with you their very interactive and interesting presentations. I will now introduce our speaker. She is Ms. LaDonna Jan, Director of Legal and Enforcement at the Financial Services Commission of Belize. This department ensures regulatory compliance in the financial sector. She's a founding member of the Belize's Companies and Corporate Affairs Registries Project Steering Committee with a background as a magistrate for the government of Belize. Additionally, she is a practicing attorney at law and notary public. Her topic is very interesting. She will be sharing Belize's experience undergoing the OECD second round peer review assessment that took place in 2022. In receiving an overall partially compliant rating, Belize was automatically placed on the European Union's Annex 1 listing. Her presentation will cover the challenges, implications experienced by this adverse listing, and how Belize was able to apply for a supplementary review and received approval, resulting in the removal from Annex 1. I am sure that all of this will benefit you all. I welcome Ms. Donna John to share with us her presentation.
Hello and good morning. Thank you, Ms. Sosa, for the warm welcome. It's a pleasure to be with you today and to share our experience with you. I will be presenting today on Belize's removal from the European Union's Annex 1 listing. The OECD peer review, exchange of information on request, as most of us know, caringly and lovingly as the EOIR. For those of you who are not familiar, the OECD stands for the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. What is it? Well, the EOIR is a robust and transparent process, and it's conducted when on site by 2 of the peer jurisdictions and 1 member from the Secretariat. Belize's peer review report was first approved by the PRG, which is the peer review group of the Global Forum on Transparency and the Exchange of Information for Tax Purposes. And that report was the 14th of June, and it was later adopted on the 14th of July by the Global Forum. This was in 2023. The on-site took place in 2022, and there were a series of reviews for which at July 2023, the report became official as it was adopted. So phase 1 examines the legal and regulatory framework, and phase 2 gets into the meat of things, which looks into the implementation of the framework in practice, better known as the effectiveness test. The exchange of information and legal, The exchange of information and the legal and regulatory frameworks that allow it to happen. More importantly, the effectiveness in the implementation and administration of the process surrounding the exchange of information on request, as indicated earlier, EOIRs. A jurisdiction must be able to demonstrate the availability of information, access to information, and the exchange of information with other jurisdictions. The peer review contains 4 ratings to which can be allocated to a jurisdiction once it has undergone its full peer review. These are a compliant, which is what everyone aspires to receiving, a largely compliant, partially compliant, or non-compliant. In Belize, we have a special system. We have a unique jurisdiction that is a bifurcated system. The automatic exchange of information, which is known as the AEOI, is the responsibility of the Belize Tax Services Department, while the exchange of information on request, EOIR, falls within the purview of the Financial Services Commission of Belize. In other jurisdictions, both the AEOI and the EOIR fall within the purview of either their tax or revenue departments. To date, the OECD has conducted 2 rounds of review for Belize. The first round transpired in 2014. As you can see here, at that time, Belize was only assessed for 6 incoming requests. Fast forward, there was the introduction of the 2016 terms of reference, and Belize's second round review occurred in 2022 with a whopping 115 incoming requests. That's a vast difference from 2014, where there were only 6 incoming requests. As you can imagine, there would be a need for much more human resources availability to actually complete such a large number of requests, as opposed to the 6 that were received in 2014. So there in Belize, there has been a change in the international business industry in Belize with the enactment of the Belize Companies Act, which is Act number 8 of 2022, streamlining the IBCs and local companies as a Belize company. This transition process was accomplished via a re-registration process. This was for our online business registry system, which is better known as the OBRS here in Belize. Belize was also a leader in implementing its economic substance legislative framework. On July 17, 2023, Belize received an overall rating of partially compliant from the OECD. As you would notice here, we shared of the 10 elements assessed. You have our ratings for the 6 incoming requests that we had in 2014, followed by our ratings in the 2022 assessment. Belize received compliant ratings for 4 elements, largely compliant for 3 elements, and partially compliant for 3 elements, being A1, A2, C5, being the availability of ownership and identity information, availability of accounting information, and quality and timeliness of responses, respectively. During the assessment in 2022, Belize was in the process of enacting or had enacted various legislative frameworks and amendments to address the deficiencies that we had realized existed, and in preparation for our CFATF review. These frameworks included the Accounting Records Maintenance Act, which we did a number of amendments to. Records must now be kept in Belize at the registered agent's office or the registered office. These records must be kept updated and current. Those are keywords. The Director General of the Financial Services Commission was delegated as a competent authority under the Accounting Records Maintenance Act. There were also a number of amendments to the Belize Companies Act, which made it mandatory to provide beneficial ownership information in the register. So now it is a requirement that all beneficial ownership information be uploaded into our online business registry system. As well, there were amendments to the International Trust, and one of the notable amendments here made it a mandatory annual filing of attestation requirement. The enactment and implementation of these frameworks did not meet the deadline when the July 2023 report was prepared. However, these amendments were mentioned when Belize took the floor before the peer review group in Paris in June of 2023. These amendments have since been enacted and were included in Belize's supplementary application, and the effectiveness will be assessed in the upcoming supplementary assessment. Belize will undergo its supplementary assessment in the first quarter of 2025. Due to this partially compliant designation, the European Union proceeded to automatically list Belize on the Annex 1 non-cooperative jurisdictions for tax purposes on October 2023. This designation was an automatic designation pursuant to Criterion 1.2 of the criteria for establishing the European Union list of non-cooperative jurisdictions for tax purposes, and not one based on legislative frameworks implemented to address the deficiencies. I am sure, as anyone who has ever experienced this adverse listing, it was definitely a difficult blow to the jurisdiction. Some of the impacts of automatic listing to Annex 1 of the EU that jurisdictions face is the threat of financial institutions and donor agencies to pull funding and projects in Belize, the reduction of foreign direct investments, challenges in access to finance, large number of queries and report preparations, or businesses leaving the jurisdiction, and defensive tax measures from European Union countries. With this, what did we do? Well, Belize set itself on a serious mission, and we submitted an urgent application in December of 2023 amidst the whole Christmas break, via a written procedure mechanism to the Global Forum peer review group, even though the window was a very narrow one to meet the requirement of the European Union Code of Conduct group, and it may or may not have been considered given the tight timeline. So just to give you an idea, after you have been delisted, there's a formal application process for which you can then be considered for delisting from Annex 1. And what we did is, by submitting this application process, the application process would have to first be approved by the peer review group, and that would have to be communicated to the European Union Code of Conduct within a timely frame so that there could be a delisting before the next ECOFINS meeting. So that's the process that would normally take place. So in February of 2024, Belize's application for a supplementary assessment was approved by the Global Forum peer review group. We were very happy about that. And based on the positive recommendation by the European Union Code of Conduct group to the European Union General Affairs Council, Belize was delisted from European Union's Annex 1 on the 20th of February 2024, and we were placed on Annex 2. Moving forward, what are some of the things that we are doing or what we need to do? So we are taking more robust and proactive measures, such as enforcement measures, to monitor the integrity of the information contained within the online business registry system. It is vital that what we say is in the register is what actually exists. So we have beefed up compliance. We are verifying that information. We are making sure that what goes in is credible information that when jurisdictions make a request, we have the information that is necessary to provide to these jurisdictions, which would in exchange increase our ability to do a much better rating or receive a better rating on the effectiveness of the legislation. It is one thing to have the legislation in place. It's another thing completely to ensure that your legislation is doing what it says it's doing, and it's able to allow you to retrieve the information being requested so that you can provide quality responses to EOIRs from the incoming request from the other jurisdictions. We are doing rigorous on-site assessments, which is done by an increase in the number of on-site assessments and desk-based review. There's also being a compliance unit set up specifically for the registry, the Belize Companies and Corporate Affairs Registry, as a first layer of a compliance of the business entity data, as we said, the integrity of the information, particularly the monitoring, supervising, and regulating of the business ownership data. There are also being enforcement penalties. We are levying those for failure to provide information, and by doing this, we are ensuring that the legislation is actually being supervised, monitored, and enforced. There are stricter measures as it relates to the beneficial ownership and trustee information for international trusts, and the development of a digital platform to support regulatory mandate and enhance regulatory effectiveness. We are committed. The compliance unit has more than doubled in its capacity for human resources so that we are able to perform these inspections that we need to ensure that the legislation is being followed and to show that we are conducting robust supervisory measures in our licensees, in the integrity of our system, to make sure that when that information is looked upon, that we can say without any doubt or apprehension the quality of the information and the accuracy of that information contained in the OBRS. Some of the lessons learned: to avoid being blacklisted by the European Union as a non-cooperative tax jurisdiction, it is crucial to understand the criteria used by the European Union to assess countries and the actions taken by the jurisdiction to stay off the Annex 1 or the infamous blacklist, to be removed from it. The European Union updates its blacklist of non-cooperative tax jurisdictions twice a year. And this is important because your application, if you receive a non-compliant or partially compliant, which leads to an automatic delisting under criterion 1.2, there are only 2 delisting processes in the year. So if you are adversely listed, there's a short scope or period for which you can actually, or a window, for which you can apply to become delisted at the next meeting. Otherwise, your delisting would be at a minimum of 1 year with the tight timelines for applications. So that's something to keep in mind. And also to focus on tax transparency, fair taxation, and the implementation of OECD measures to prevent tax base erosion and profit sharing. Additionally, the European Union is considering including criteria related to ensuring a minimum level of taxation in line with the OECD's Pillar 2 solution, beneficial ownership, and the misuse of shell companies. Overall, staying off of the European Union's blacklist requires proactive approach to tax governance, including the implementation of economic substance laws, ensuring tax transparency, fair taxation, and cooperation with international tax avoidance and evasion measures. It is also important for jurisdictions to maintain positive engagement and discussion with EU officials to address technical issues and to ensure compliance with international standards. Some of the recommendations would be to attend competent authority meetings for OECD. I implore you to maintain dialogue with the European Union. All of these steps to ensure that the jurisdiction maintains its relationships and open communication can ensure that you are not blindsided or that your jurisdiction would not have the unfortunate experience of being automatically listed on Annex 1 of the European Union's list. And that will be all for my presentation. I thank you for your attention, and it was a pleasure to present Belize's experience to you. Thank you.
Such an informative presentation where we share Belize's experience in the process of being removed from EU's Annex 1 listing, but also the implications to a jurisdiction when determined as a non-cooperative tax jurisdiction, which I am sure is not alien to us. However, I am sure that Belize's case study can give you some insight in what measures you can take and how to approach a similar experience. Thanks, Ms. John. This leads us to another very informative presentation on Belize's efforts in meeting CFATF recommendations related to money laundering and terrorist financing. Mrs. Lenny Isaguirre Magan is an attorney at law and director of the Financial Intelligence Unit of Belize, FIU, since 2013, driving change within the organization. She leads national efforts on AML, CFT compliance, and serves as chair of Belize's National Anti-Money Laundering and Combating the Financing of Terrorism Committee, known as NAMLAC. She will share insights on Belize's efforts in meeting CFATF recommendations, and of course, she will also be sharing Belize's strategy to enhance regulatory compliance in preparation for Belize's mutual evaluation, which happened in 2023. Welcome, Mrs. Magan.
Thank you very much, and good morning to everyone. It's my pleasure to be here with you all today. I want to start by just prefacing that Belize is still undergoing its 4th round assessment by the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force. So that in those circumstances, I won't be able to speak directly to any sort of ratings or results in this presentation, but I will chronicle what our strategy has been and how we've been approaching the process and some of the lessons that we've already learned along the way. So with that, I'll get into it. In this presentation, I'm going to be providing a brief overview of the compliance landscape, essentially what we're trying to comply with on the anti-money laundering, countering the financing of terrorism front. And then I'll talk briefly about Belize's fourth round mutual evaluation by the CFATF, how we're progressing through that and what our coordination mechanisms are, some of the lessons learned along the way, and what is next for Belize in this process. So the recommendations that we're trying to comply with and that we have to demonstrate how we've been implementing in our fourth round review process by the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force are recommendations that have been set down by the Financial Action Task Force. Just briefly, because I'm sure a lot of you might be aware of the FATF, which is an intergovernmental organization that is based in Paris, which sets the international standards as it relates to anti-money laundering, combating terrorism and proliferation financing. And it does so with a view to try and create policy to promote the necessary political will to bring about the necessary structures and regulatory reforms in countries to comply with the standards and to ensure that they have robust mechanisms in place. FATF only has 40 member countries, but it really has over 200 countries that are trying to comply with the implementation requirements of these standards, and it does so through FATF-styled regional bodies such as the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force. Belize is a member of the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force, and through that global network, the FATF is able to influence over 200 countries. Now, the FATF recommendations, also known as the standards, are what sets out a comprehensive and consistent framework of measures which countries should implement to combat money laundering and terrorism financing. The recommendations focuses on two aspects between the recommendations and the methodology for assessing compliance, and those are effectiveness and technical compliance. Currently, the FATF and the Global Network are undergoing their fourth round of country assessment. As soon as one round is finished, the following round commences, and each round has a specific focus. So the fourth round has been focused on technical compliance with more emphasis on effectiveness measures, and the fifth round will have an even greater focus on effectiveness. Now, looking at the CFATF, for which Belize is a member of, that's the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force. And that's an organization comprised of 24 states in the Caribbean Basin region who have all joined together and agreed to implement the FATF recommendations. So the CFATF plays an important role in terms of rolling out the Mutual Evaluation Program, which is geared towards assessing its membership's compliance with the recommendations. Some of the member states of the CFATF, apart from Belize, include Antigua and Barbuda, Anguilla, Aruba, the Bahamas, Barbados, Bermuda, the British Virgin Islands, the Cayman Islands, Curacao, Dominica, Grenada, Guyana, Haiti, Jamaica, Montserrat, St. Kitts and Nevis, St. Lucia, St. Martin, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Suriname, the Turks and Caicos Islands, Trinidad and Tobago, and Venezuela. In terms of its work on assessing the implementation of the standards, the FATF and its FSRBs, such as the CFATF, work to monitor and have oversight of countries' actions, and they do so through a mutual evaluation program. Now, the mutual evaluation is a peer review program which seeks to assess a country's compliance with the 40 recommendations, but also how it implements measures and whether or not the implementation of those measures are effective. And so it looks at 11 immediate outcomes of effectiveness. Now, in terms of the CFATF's program, to give you some context, because this is the FSRB for which Belize is a member, the CFATF has so far undertaken and published 17 mutual evaluation reports, with 7 countries remaining to allow for the end of the 4th round process. Now, following a mutual evaluation and the adoption of a report, a country may end up in one of 2 processes at the CFATF level, which is regular follow-up or enhanced follow-up. Those members who are in enhanced follow-up based on their assessment results and also on a specific criteria, which is their broad money supply, may also end up in the FATF pool and could also be considered for review by the FATF should they meet the prioritization criteria. So that is also another factor for countries to consider. To date, of the countries that have been assessed by the CFATF, of the 17 countries, 15 of those countries have entered into the enhanced follow-up process, and 2 of those countries or territories have ended up in the regular follow-up process. Now, clearly the regular follow-up process is the goalpost and where countries want to be headed. The follow-up process is on a less intensive cycle, and you do report to plenary on any actions or any sort of deficiencies that would have been identified in your report, but not as frequently. In enhanced follow-up, the reporting basis is more intensive, and countries are required to take action to apply for re-ratings to address deficiencies in terms of its technical compliance. So it needs to address non-compliant or partially compliant ratings for technical compliance. In the 4th round, there is no re-rating process for effectiveness. However, countries do need to show that they are working towards improving effectiveness as well. I'll now go over Belize's progress through this 4th round assessment process. As I said, Belize is still undergoing the process. So Belize's 4th round evaluation process for us would have really commenced in December of 2022. We received our technical compliance questionnaire at that time, and we would have been given 6 months within which we needed to complete that questionnaire and submit it to the assessment team. The assessment process can take anywhere from 18 to 24 months. In our case, it will span just under 24 months, given the date of the next plenary and when our on-site visit would have occurred, which was the end of last year. So we've been engaged in this process for quite some time, and for every country who's been in this process, they will appreciate that it is an extremely resource-intensive process. Our technical compliance submission was due and submitted on June 2nd of last year. And then 2 months later, we had to submit our information on how we've been implementing effectiveness and achieving the required outcomes to demonstrate that we have an effective system. Following that visit, we would have then received our first draft of our report in February. And between February and August of this year, we will continue in an exchange with the assessment team. And also, we will be able to see comments from reviewers very soon to see how the report is being considered and whether or not there are any issues that have been identified in terms of our compliance with technical issues or effectiveness. Following a series of review, we expect that our report will be discussed at the November 2024 plenary of the CFATF. And at that time, we hope that the report will be adopted, and we look favorably towards the outcome. Once the report is adopted in November, it still goes through an additional global quality and consistency review process where it then goes out to the global network again for any further comments. And thereafter, it should be adopted around February of 2025. So as you can see from the brief timeline, we still have some time before we are going to receive Belize's results in terms of this assessment process. Now, Belize approached the assessment process looking at certain critical actions that provided a foundation for some of the mechanisms that we put in place. So it was important for us that we had to have a reliable and robust legislative framework. So we prioritized having a gap analysis, but that also ran alongside some of our other measures. We knew that we needed to also demonstrate effectiveness. So we also prioritized looking at what our effectiveness measures are and assessing ourselves in terms of how we comply or meet the 11 immediate outcomes on effectiveness. And then finally, continuous monitoring. We appreciate that that is a part of the process that we have to build into our mechanisms and systems. Even while undergoing our preparations and as we undergo the assessment, we can see where the standards continue to evolve, and keeping an eye on that is also important to us. So we had a multi-dimensional approach in terms of getting our work done, and as we continue to do in Belize. It was important that there was a national coordination mechanism, and this took place through the National Anti-Money Laundering Committee, which I'll speak about more. It was also important that we built capacity within our agencies and officers to be able to undertake the analysis and provide the critical policy advice within their organizations on where Belize stands in relation to its compliance obligations with the recommendation. We also wanted to ensure that we fully address technical compliance, and so we undertook a robust project in that regard. It's important for the jurisdiction that we are not carrying over any sort of technical compliance issues into the fourth round, and so we prioritize that as well. And communication and awareness amongst our stakeholders was also critical to our approach. So speaking to our national coordination mechanisms, national coordination took place through the National Anti-Money Laundering Committee. Now, this committee was developed to implement and oversee a national action plan to ensure coordination between law enforcement, supervisory authorities, and other competent authorities to address the threats of financial crime and money laundering and terrorism financing in Belize. NAMLAC was formally established from 2014, and since that time, NAMLAC meets periodically to review national coordination matters, including undertaking risk assessments and the oversight of our preparations for our mutual evaluation. NAMLAC's meetings intensified from about 2 years prior to our on-site visit. So that was an important role of NAMLAC. NAMLAC was meeting almost monthly to ensure that all of the agencies were abreast and aware of where Belize stood in terms of its preparations and what needed to occur, and so that they were able to provide the necessary support for the process within their agencies. As we can see, NAMLAC is a multi-agency committee, and it's chaired by the director of the FIU, and it has members from law enforcement such as the police department, the customs and excise department, the Department of Immigration and Border Management Services, from supervisory authorities such as the Central Bank of Belize, the Office of the Supervisor of Insurance and Private Pensions, the Financial Services Commission, and also the Financial Intelligence Unit in its supervisory capacity. It also includes other offices such as the Belize Tax Service Department and the Financial Secretary and the Solicitor General, which represents the Attorney General's Ministry. NAMLAC is primarily guided by the National Anti-Money Laundering, Combating the Financing of Terrorism and Proliferation Policy and Strategy. NAMLAC, following Belize's first risk assessment, would have developed a policy and strategy in 2022 and further updated this in 2023. This policy provides a holistic guide for all of the authorities And it's based on measures that would have been identified as necessary from our first risk assessment, as well as the mitigation measures that were called for. It also has an emphasis on implementing the FATF recommendations and ensuring that all aspects of our regime, law enforcement, supervision authorities, are complying with their obligation. So that was a primary focus of NAMLAC, and that also trickled into all of our agencies who have specific policies and strategies that tie back to our national policy and strategy. So we're all looking at that specific goal as we build out our measures or refined our measures. Capacity building. Preparing for this and being conversant with the standards was critical. And in that regard, it was important for us to build capacity within our offices. And so we would have participated in FATF standards training. We did it initially in 2019, and we felt the need for a refresher training in 2023, given the effluxion of time and also changes in personnel. We had a refresher training in 2023. We also conducted our own internal training with our agencies in terms of how to conduct a review and a gap analysis and horizontal analysis of different mutual evaluation reports. So this training was important, and it aided them in the sort of analysis that needs to be conducted as you prepare and try to understand where your jurisdiction is in relation to the standards. NAMLAC also utilized certain mechanisms to promote the preparation for our evaluation. One of those are through working groups, which some of which are standing and some of which were specifically comprised for the assessment process. So the Policy and Legislative Drafting Working Group. This working group was established as we were preparing for the process, but we also quickly realized that it will need to be a permanent feature of our national structure. So their priority was to conduct a gap analysis of Belize's technical compliance and identify legislative mechanisms to address those gaps. The organizations that form a part of this working group are a cross-section. It was important to have somebody from the Attorney General's ministry as well, because they would have kept abreast of what the policy discussions are, so that when any sort of drafting instructions, policy papers are sent to that ministry, we have a champion within that ministry as well for these matters. There was also a form of peer review amongst working group members. So all of the working group members had to participate in undertaking the gap analysis, but they also met regularly to review the analysis and agree on what, if any, the deficiencies were. Any sort of findings along with drafting instructions to address those matters had to then be presented to NAMLAC and approved to NAMLAC, who would then make further submissions to the ministerial level to cabinet. The group of supervisors. This is a long-standing committee under the National Anti-Money Laundering Committee. And this group is tasked to explore strategies to tackle common supervisory challenges and identify areas that require targeted focus. So some of the ways in which they really contributed towards the process and towards demonstrating our effectiveness is coordinating training and guidance activities. And along with that, they also were fundamental with conducting sensitization sessions with stakeholders on legislative actions that were being taken through this preparation mechanism. So the group of supervisors provided key support in that regard. We also formed an ad hoc working group which looked at technical compliance and effectiveness measures. Now, this group comprised of membership from across all of NAMLAC's agencies, as well as some non-NAMLAC agencies. From this group, we would have appointed lead agencies. It was important to have somebody with key responsibility for each recommendation, and there are 40 of them. So, of course, certain agencies had to take responsibility for more than one recommendation. Similarly, it was important for there to be a lead person and agency in relation to each immediate outcome. So we adopted the strategy from the very beginning, and we've kept that strategy going through this process, going through the review of our reports. The desired outcome of having these groups is to ensure that our submissions were prepared in a timely manner, that the group would have participated in a cross review of those submissions, and also to ensure that we have a mechanism in place to review our report or draft report. We also have the Financial Crimes Working Group. Now, this working group is more on an operational basis, and they meet together to look jointly at cases and matters, and they continued to keep operational throughout this process. Some of the key outcomes, especially from a technical compliance perspective, was that Belize would have amended a number of legislation. So this list, which spans the Money Laundering and Terrorism Prevention Act, you would have heard my colleague earlier from the FSC also refer to some of the mechanisms under the Belize Companies Act and other key pieces of legislation to deal with corporate structure. Amendments to those pieces of legislation would have also impacted and should have a positive effect on our compliance with certain recommendations, such as recommendation 24 and 25. And so there were synergies in some areas. We also enacted new pieces of legislation, such as the Nonprofit Organization Act, the Extradition Act, Civil Asset Recovery, and Unexplained Wealth Act. Communication. This is key. Given the amount of legislative work that Belize undertook, it is of course key to have communication and that political will at the ministerial level. Prioritizing legislative time and resources is key and extremely important, and I'm certain that we would not have been able to do this and in the time frame that we did it without that sort of high-level political commitment and will. It was also important to have private sector engagement. Belize undertook a strategy to engage private sector from very early on. We initially had a launch where we soft launched the idea that Belize was about to start its risk assessment well before we even received our questionnaire. We engaged with private sector. We wanted to get them talking and understanding that this assessment was upon us. Following that, it was also important to engage with them and conduct consultations on any sort of legislative amendments. And this is especially crucial given the time for some of these amendments. Also, it was important to have any sort of sensitization on any new legal obligations. And a good example of this was our regime in relation to targeted financial sanctions. Looking at some of the lessons that we learned, as I said before, political will, extremely important. We certainly appreciate the role of the political directorate and how they can mobilize resources and time for us to put in place the necessary measures to achieve compliance. We also looked at how important it is to have systems and mechanisms in place. We had to have coordination mechanisms, working groups that will continue to review policy and advise the heads at NAMLAC in terms of what policy is underway and what policy we need to comply with. So that was important, and the role of the policy and legislative drafting working group. And outside of this assessment process, they will continue to monitor and review the evolving standards as it relates to Belize's framework. We also looked at sensitization and communication. It's key to have this communication with your stakeholders so that they understand the process, they understand what's expected of Belize, and they also understand the gravity of the assessment process in relation to Belize. There are multiple demands on agencies, and so it's critical for agencies to be advised of what resources they may need, and also in terms of prioritizing specific resources to navigate and assign to this process. Certain that a lot of agencies have quickly realized that developing personnel with capacity in this area is key, and that those personnel and the built-in mechanisms will need to be a permanent feature within their organization as we go from one round to the other. What's next for Belize? So as Belize continues to navigate its fourth round assessment, we know that we are going to continue to review our draft mutual evaluation report to hopefully have narrowed issues for discussion at the CFATF plenary in November. That's when Belize's report is going to be considered and hopefully adopted with publication for early 2025. But apart from that, Belize continues to work on its regime. We don't need to wait for the adoption of the report. We have drafts. We have also done our own self-assessment, and we understand where, if any, our vulnerabilities are. And we've been working to address those, even without having a finalized report. And that's important for us because we understand that after the adoption of the report, we will be going into either one of the follow-up processes. So we're not sitting around waiting. We're taking necessary measures to conduct the necessary capacity building, to continue to build out our framework, and to continue to put mechanisms in place to demonstrate our effectiveness. And so with that, I conclude my presentation on what the process has been like for Belize so far. And I would like to end by saying that we do optimistically look forward to the results of our assessment.
I am sure that many of our participants may be familiar with CFATF's rigorous mutual evaluation process. However, I am also sure that there are several considerations and lessons that participants can also learn from Belize's efforts in this process. Thanks, Mrs. Magan. I would like to share with you all today, before we move on to our next speaker, that we have, as we speak, over 350 participants from over 35 countries listening as we speak. Quite impressive. Due to the large number of participants, you are not able to ask live questions, but we encourage you to write your questions on the questions section of the platform. Some of your questions our speakers can address immediately. If we consider that your questions require a more elaborate response, then we will address such questions in the Q&A segment of today's agenda. Our next speaker, Mr. Alexander Taymans, is a key expert on beneficial ownership at the EU AML-CFT Global, responsible for designing and implementing various activities offered to partner jurisdictions and the global community on beneficial ownership. The presentation that he will be sharing with us today delves into navigating EU requirements with a focus on anti-money laundering compliance and sanctions. The central theme revolves and will revolve around understanding the ultimate beneficiary and the significance of its data. It will offer roadmaps to achieve compliance. It will highlight crucial oversight areas and present case studies of countries showcasing good governance practices. This is quite an interesting topic, I'm sure, for all participants here today. So I would like to welcome Mr. Taymans.
Thank you very much, Nilda, for this introduction, and good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Let me first start with thanking the FSC Belize for the invitation to speak and to join this panel of speakers and experts. I think these two first presentations were extremely interesting, in particular from our perspective, from the Global Facility, where we do provide technical assistance and support in jurisdictions that are entering this process of addressing some of the issues, AML CFT shortcomings identified by FATF or other FSRBs. So certainly some similarities that you will see with what I will present, and what I would like to focus in the coming 20 minutes is sharing a bit what we see from our seat and from the engagement we have with the different jurisdictions we work with, and I'll be focusing here more particularly on the implementation by jurisdictions of beneficial ownership disclosure regimes, which, as we all know, is a very challenging topic, which involves many different systems that need to work together, systems and stakeholders. So a quite complex work to be implemented, and I would like to share today some thoughts and experience that we have seen in countries addressing and implementing such frameworks. Maybe a few words before starting on the AML-CFT Global Facility. This is an EU-funded project that is mandated to provide technical assistance or support to partner jurisdictions around the world. We have been working since 2019, since 2020 on beneficial ownership with countries in the CFATF region, in the SAMLAG, which is another FSRB for Southern and Eastern Africa, for the GAFILAT, so that's Latin America, and the MENAFATF, the Middle East and North Africa FATF-style regional body, as well as the Monival regions. We have been working with over 30 non-EU jurisdictions in assisting in addressing those shortcomings, and we have developed a methodology to provide that support in a flexible and very agile way, respecting the national context and building on existing AML-CFT structures. What we also are paying attention to is really to develop a holistic approach to addressing those shortcomings and to ensure that the systems that are implemented are sustainable after the event of a delisting, for instance. Visually, this is the scope of geography where we are active, and you see here the countries in blue with which we have been having bilateral activities, and the countries in yellow which were involved in regional activities, which we are also organizing on a broad range of topics. The Global Facility covers a number of recommendations within the AML-CFT panel chain and FATF recommendations, from regulation to beneficial ownership to law enforcement, civil society, and justice as well. So those are all topics that the facility is working on and provides technical assistance in. When we're looking at more specifically at beneficial ownership, we've been active in 26 countries, more or less, in all those different FSRBs that I mentioned. And those jurisdictions are quite diverse, both in terms of the economic context, in terms of the size, in terms of the risk profiles, and this really, and also in terms of the legal organization. We work with common law countries, with civil law countries, and this really gives us quite a good overview of how such beneficial ownership framework can be implemented. We have developed to support those jurisdictions a multi-jurisdictional and interdisciplinary team of experts, so that the experts really match the countries we work with, from Austria to Argentina, Belgium, UK, Ukraine as well. And we have as well been developing a large network of EU and non-EU partners, discussing and working on thematic activities, which would be very interesting and which I will mention later on. Maybe an overview of the key points that I will go through. I would like to share with you a number of success criteria that we see are very important when countries are facing such listing or facing such enhanced follow-up procedure. I will share with you the structure of joint activities that we usually recommend and see as helping jurisdiction structuring their approach and their actions to deal with those shortcomings. I'll present the global facilities modular approach and the different phases of the technical assistance and different phases of the roadmap that countries will go through when implementing such BO disclosure framework. And then I'll finish with a few words on how support can be requested from the facility. First, maybe on the success criteria, and this really mirrors some of the elements that were presented in the two previous presentations. The process of addressing those shortcomings will be quicker and more effective if some key features are present. The first is effective governance. The need for governance that is tailored to the local needs and context, and that is composed of committed and credible members. I think Lenny presented the NANLAC format. This is the sort of things that in fact are very useful in terms of coordination and ensuring that all the different stakeholders are involved in the process. And this also touches upon the importance to have senior commitment, the political will that was mentioned before. This needs to trickle down to at the ministerial level and the administration, whereby it will help emphasize the importance of the project. Make sure that everyone is on board and share the same vision. Speaking of vision, it's very important that at the onset there is a determination of the expectations and that the visions are aligned, and this will ensure a smooth implementation. We also see that with countries with which we work, the development of a joint activity model is very useful, whereby we would have shared resources from both partner country and the global facility on some of the specific topics that we would work on. And then it was also mentioned the communication. It's really important that the country and the authorities engage with all key stakeholders at all phases of the implementation, whether it's at the design phase, at the enactment of the legal framework, the technical compliance phase, or at the implementation and operationalization of the framework. Communication will be key in those different phases. And of course, we're talking both about internal communication within authorities, but also external communication. I think it was mentioned the private sector. It's really important to have those communication channels established and clearly identified. And then a last key element is the stakeholder engagement, the importance to proactively engage on a continuous basis, on an ongoing basis with key stakeholders across all levels and across both the public and the private sector, so that everyone is really aligned when it comes to understanding and integrating the different perspective and what's at stake. And this is a very simple illustration of the sort of organizational structure that we would recommend when looking at the BO disclosure framework, with a steering group consisting of senior representatives from the jurisdictions, some representative from the global facility if there's a collaboration with the global facility, but that's not always the case and not necessary always. And then we would have one person, one lead person for the project, which would be the project delivery manager, and different phase managers. As you will see, there's different phases. that will involve different expertise, and it's important to have really the right person leading those different phases. Now, when I mentioned the global facility modular approach. We developed this modular approach because we really saw it as enabling jurisdictions to assess, to design and implement a BO disclosure regime that addresses the national context, that integrates with the systems of other compliant jurisdictions within the region, within the global network, and that is demonstrably fit for purpose. Such modular approach allows also for efficient design and implementation, allows, and that's a very important aspect, I think, when we're talking about beneficial ownership, allows for a whole of government approach. We can come back to that later, but this is a really important perspective to give when working on beneficial ownership. Such modular approach also simplifies cross-border cooperation and ensures that lessons learned in other jurisdictions enhance our support for the partner jurisdiction. Now, looking at the implementation of a BO disclosure framework roadmap, we have divided such roadmap in 4 phases. Here again, it can be done with the support of the facility, but we see this as applicable to basically all jurisdictions implementing such framework. When it comes to the involvement of the facility, this phased approach will be implemented on a peer-to-peer basis by experts with technical and operational expertise. And those 4 phases are basically the first phase looking at assessment. I think it was Lenny that mentioned the gap assessment. This is a very important exercise, assessing, understanding the situation as is, understanding the situation that we want to achieve, and preparing for the phase 2. Phase 2 being focused on technical compliance, having the legal and regulatory framework right. Phase 3 being the operationalization of the technical framework. So looking at its implementation, what systems are implemented, looking at supervision, looking at enforcement. It's really the effectiveness and IO5 element of beneficial ownership transparency. And then we have phase 4, which is horizon scanning and integration. And this is really the sustainable element of the system that is being implemented by the jurisdiction. Looking at phase 1 in a bit more detailed, the objective of this phase will be to establish a comprehensive understanding of the existing BO framework and prepare for the future BO disclosure regime of the jurisdiction. Key activities involved in this phase are the country BO framework assessment, the gap analysis, identification of gaps and areas where improvements are necessary, and then also considering a number of policy improvements and amendments that would need to be enacted to address those gaps. The output of such work would be a roadmap outlining necessary actions and policy decisions that would be adopted by the steering group, discussed by the steering group, and adopted by it to guide the subsequent phases of implementation. This is an important document because it will also enable the country to have timelines and milestones and set an agenda for the implementation of the work plan. Phase 2, the objective here would be to develop and refine the legal and technical framework to ensure that it is future-proof and is fit for purpose. I think it was mentioned by Lenny or Ladonna, the constant evolution of and refinement of the FATF standards, of the best practices that we see throughout the world when it comes to beneficial ownership. It's very important that the framework enables the jurisdictions to learn from those best practices and embed them in the jurisdiction. Key activities within that phase would be the legal person and legal arrangement risk assessment. That's a very important element. It's a new aspect of recommendation 24 and 25. Here again, the Global Facility has developed a methodology for assessing those risks for both money laundering, terrorism financing purposes, a highly tailorable methodology that could be interesting for jurisdictions looking at implementing such exercise. Legislative action is of course, a natural follow-up to that. And then the development of BO guidance. This is looking beyond the legal framework, providing guidance to stakeholders from the private sector, from the public sector, is important to ensure that there is really a consistent understanding of what needs to be done, what needs to be verified, how it needs to be verified. Very important that this is consistent across the different stakeholders within the jurisdiction. And then another key activity of this phase is looking at the IT solutions. We work on BO registers, on the development of BO registers, and some jurisdictions are in this situation where they need to identify the business need, the technical requirements. I will let maybe Mindogas elaborate more on that, but this is a crucial element of setting up BO registers. And that would be in phase 2 before implementation. The output being a legislative framework here with guidance document ready for implementation. Implementation in phase 3, which would be specifically oriented toward the operationalization of the BO registry, but also not only of the registry, but of the broader set of BO disclosure requirements for obliged entities, financial institutions, the NFBPs, making sure that they actually conduct their obligation as they should, and that the supervisors do supervise and enforce those requirements. Key activities would be launching registry operations, looking at the regulatory framework and the risk-based controls that such registry is now asked to implement, and that's also coming from the FATF guidance on recommendation 24. So a new area there that is that countries are implementing throughout the world. Here also a very important tools that should be developed by jurisdictions are supervision manuals specifically dedicated to beneficial ownership. It's a very specific topic, and we develop it with jurisdictions, but we see a great need for supervisors to be equipped with such manuals. We don't see it often in jurisdictions, and there is clearly merit in developing such manuals. Likewise, designing sanctions metrics or sanctions policies to make sure that they are both dissuasive and proportionate is something that is important and not easy for jurisdictions to implement. So here also something to look at. The output of this phase being a fully functional, tested BO disclosure regime and registry with supervision and ready to enforce compliance and processes. And then comes phase 4 once the implementation has started, processes have been tested. The purpose of this phase is really to maintain the effectiveness and the sustainability and the up-to-dateness and adequacy of the system to make sure that they address the emerging threats and risks that are identified by jurisdictions. Activities in this phase include updating the risk assessment, increasing international cooperation, and stakeholder engagement. I don't go into the details of all those activities, but we could spend half a day, talking about all these. They are really key in for countries to implement such framework and sustain those framework. And here the output will be a proactive and adaptable BO disclosure regime that remains effective throughout the years. Here, a quick slide to again insist on the importance to ensure sustainability and the support the facility can provide in technical assistance, in sharing best practices between national systems. We have also been working with FSRBs in developing a number of tools, so that's also something important that could benefit countries from the region. And we've also been since 2020 developing a global network of BO experts with all these different backgrounds that I'm sure would be very that would be very interesting to engage with. And just maybe another way to visualize such roadmap that I presented. Here you will see all the different activities that I mentioned in those different phases. So the preparatory phase, the technical compliance phase, the implementation phase, and then in the bottom, the ongoing activities that will ensure the sustainability. From what we see, the implementation of such a roadmap would take at best 2 years. Considering that we're in the jurisdictions where there's no BO register, starting from scratch. And again, here, I think the interest of this graphic is to show that, well, depending on where the jurisdiction is in this graphic, the focus would be different. Yeah, so that's for the timeline that we see for implementation of a BO roadmap. And with that, just a few words on what is the process if you want to get in touch and get a support from the facility. You will have the slides after that, so I will not elaborate too much. You can also go to our website or reach out to me directly so that I can explain that to you. And I will stop now actually because my time is due, and I would like to give the floor to the next speaker because I'm sure they have plenty of interesting things to say. So thank you very much, everyone. I'm happy to take questions if any. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mr. Tayman, for sharing EU's global facility and the work it is conducting on beneficial ownership since 2020. I am sure that this discussion has provided participants with an indication of the key implementation success criteria for jurisdictions to implement a beneficial ownership disclosure framework. We all know the importance for jurisdictions to ensure that we have a fit-for-purpose, sustainable, and effective framework related to beneficial ownership. And this leads us to another topic, which is how do we connect the dots? We already know that we need that fit-for-purpose, sustainable, and effective framework, but this is where the power of technology comes in for ultimate beneficiaries data management. Mr. Mindaugas Glodas is a seasoned professional in the ICT industry with 20 plus years of experience at IBM and Microsoft Lithuania. He currently serves as the Vice President of Infobalt and a board member of various other organizations. He will share with us a very interesting presentation around the critical aspect of understanding the ultimate beneficiary and its data. The presentation will emphasize the intersection of technology with this central point, drawing from experiences in Africa. So it's not just information, it's actual experiences in Africa and the Caribbean. The discussion will explore strategies to effectively utilize technology. Mr. Glodas.
Well, thank you very much for such a generous introduction. Good morning to everyone, and also good afternoon and good evening, because I've seen we have people connecting from other continents as well, from Kenya and some other African countries. When I was listening to Ms. McGann's list of CFAT countries, I was thinking this event is really worth to be made into a serious event with a proper live event in either of those member countries, because it's end of April, but in Northern Europe, as of this morning, we still had snow. So we wish we were with you, but nevertheless, we have an interesting topic to cover. A lot has been said already, and I'd like to maybe introduce some drama. You remember, most of you will have read most of these articles. It probably started with Panama Papers, but then it continued to reverberate across the region in some other countries, and nobody wants to be in such a situation. For a country, this is not good for the economy. It decreases confidence in the financial system, restricted access to international markets, increased compliance costs, and the list can go on and go on for negative ramifications. Now, how many countries is that? In fact, when we look at different regions, there's quite a few. There's quite a few that have been by sanction, moved into one or the other list, and there's quite a few of them, unfortunately. You see, and you will recognize some of your countries here on this list. In Africa, very similar picture, even probably more dense picture of different listings for the companies, for the countries, which is not good for their businesses. Europe is not immune either. Even the European Union itself, countries such as Bulgaria and Croatia, up until now, are in one or the other list. Having been in the industry for quite some time, we understand how this feels. I'm sure many of you will recognize what this is. This is a sort of a puzzle. You connect the dots and boom, you have an elephant in the room. Now, I think it must feel to you similarly that you are connecting the dots. However, your dots that you need to connect are more complex and really require a lot of work to understand the different requirements, sometimes probably even somewhat conflicting requirements from the different organizations, starting from FATF, the World Bank, the Europol, and so on, you name it. They all have certain requirements for you to not be sanctioned, or like it is, for example, with the World Bank, to be somewhat promoted as an economy which is worth investing in for the investors from all over the world. So it's not only from the negative perspective that we should be coming to this subject, but also from the positive perspective to make the country stand out as a country that's transparent, that's compliant, that's easy to do business in. Now, we tried to put some structure into connecting these dots. And, if we look at AML, CFT, KYC regimes, they really are buzzwords, but I would like to say they are like a roof, like a shield that, you put a roof, but you still allow businesses to thrive under that roof and be protected from sanctions, but also be very invited to share some good stuff under that roof. To support that roof, there are a lot of processes that are happening in each country, need to be performed by different entities, be it government entities, regional entities, regulated businesses, or non-regulated businesses. It starts with compliance with global standards, act regulations and registries, customer identification programs for banks, customer due diligence, enhanced due diligence, ongoing monitoring, and obviously tools to do all that, but also training to your personnel to keep up with constantly evolving requirements. Many of you will still be familiar with the World Bank study, which was called Ease of Doing Business. Every country was trying to get higher on the list because this was seen as something that promotes investment in the country. Now there is a new methodology prepared, which is called Business Ready. And again, it says transparency of beneficial ownership helps safeguard the integrity and reputation of the business sector by making it unattractive to those intent of using its corporate structures for illicit purposes. Now, we believe this is not going away. It's there to stay. So we absolutely have to make sure this house is built, the roof is shielding us from any negative impacts. Now, no house will stand without foundation. And when you look at it, I think from what we heard today from the different presentations, one could easily say that foundation is beneficial ownership register. It's the core data which is then being used by all these different layers of institutions, government, ministries, governmental entities, registrars, tax authorities, you name it. They all need to have access to quality source data. Another way to look at it, if you look at it as a planet, then the surface of it is all these compliance requirements from the different organizations. Then it's the regime that you decide for your own country, and there are different flexibilities in that. But at the core of it, it's the beneficial ownership data itself. And now here, I think somebody was mentioning, Nilda, I think was mentioning that we have a poll ready for you. We want to ask you a question. Are you already considering this? Are you thinking about polls? So I think it will soon appear in the polls section. So watch what happens there, and please give us your response to what you are doing in your country. Now, you might ask, why do I feel capable of talking to you like this? Because we've done quite a bit of work for the past 25 years, working with the governments in different regions in Africa, in the Caribbean, in Southeast Asia, in Europe, in the area of registries and in the area of tax compliance. We have solutions for that have been implemented in quite a number of countries. You will probably see a dot that's representative to where you are from. Very likely over those 25 years, we've been there. We started very much as a technology company, just building a software solution that allows you to register things, keep track of things, monitor them. But we realized there's so much more to it. And I think Alexander was also in that methodology that is used by the EU Global Facility, presented it very well, that it's not only one element, it's not only the technology, it's the legal framework, it's the organizational framework, and it's the procedures within those organizations that will ensure the technology works. We therefore expanded our knowledge to include that technology and have solutions that fully comply to your requirements. The latest in series of our registry products is what we call BOREG, or Beneficiary Ownership Register. We make sure that BOREG is a tool for collecting, processing, storing, and when necessary, publishing that data for adequate, accurate, and up-to-date data about the business, about the ultimate business owners. We constantly monitor the requirements that are coming up from these different dots from the elephant, that you are bombarded by ever-evolving new requirements. I remember very well the date, October 23rd last year, when we were in Malta and the news hit that Belize was getting into one of the not so pleasant lists. And I remember the reaction of Mr. Haylock and his colleagues. I understand how much work that meant to get so quickly out of that list. And I really want to congratulate you for all the work that has been done. But one could say it's rather better not to get on that list in the first place. And I know this was a series of coincidences, but still, when we do implement a solution, we try to make sure we talk about all the recommendations that are relevant, about FAT Recommendation 24, about the EU's 5th AML directive. We constantly monitor how they evolve so that you stay abreast with those developments. Now, what that is, well, you are very familiar in your daily job with various registers. That is yet another register, but specifically focused on registering the beneficiary ownership information, which is, frankly, as we've been doing our market research, not so many countries are doing the way it is meant to be done, the way it should be done. And the next speaker, Stefan, will be introducing those future trends where the world is going in terms of even more transparency. But when we build our solution, we make sure you at least have the tools to stay abreast with those developments. So we have a full set of info services, which basically allow you to configure the system, to talk to other systems, to provide the information the way you want that information to be provided, circulated amongst the different authorities. From the technology perspective, you will be secure that once you have that solution, it's capable of talking to whoever it needs to talk within your country, to different organizations, if need be, talk to also international institutions. It's very important when you have the data to not only have that data, but be able to analyze it and visualizing what the interconnections are in today's world, where we have so much more focused on compliance. We have so many more sanctions lists for countries that are not so friendly to other countries. You know, we have a couple of wars going on. So this doesn't seem to be going away anytime soon. This will be happening, and we make sure you have those tools at your fingertips. It's very important that the system also has some brains built to it to assist your staff to realize that something wrong is emerging and you need to get red flagging. You need to get alerts, go in, check what's happening. Probably nothing, but you have to be sure the system assists you to that. So like I said, the latest in our product development, in our series of products for registries is BOREC. And we've built it, basically we have 3 options. I will not go into these technical details, but I would like to have a discussion individually with you. But those options will provide you as a minimum to be compliant, fully compliant with the recommendation 24, which requires that the public authority or body maintain adequate, accurate, and up-to-date information on the beneficial ownership of legal persons. I think this is a good way to start, but most likely you will need to go further very soon, or you will want to go further very soon, because that will be introducing additional efficiencies for not only a single organization that holds the beneficiary ownership, but also to other organizations that rely on that data. And that's enhanced data sharing and access control. We make sure that system is the core of the whole e-government setup, where information is available on a need-to-know basis, or in some extreme cases, like, for example, it is in the UK, is even available publicly. And the third option, advanced analytics, again, we go an extra step. We're still working on this to have the different verifications, to have the screening modules, including data integrations, red flagging mechanisms, and so on. So obviously there's cost attached to implementing such system, but we strongly believe that you have several options. You always have an option to talk to NRD, obviously, or some of our competitors. There aren't many. Or you can decide to build it yourself. But I think it's always useful to make sure you at least have the full understanding that you have the capacity to build a system that's future-proof, to build a system that complies to the regulations today, but will also comply to the regulations tomorrow. Therefore, like I mentioned, we do a lot of work on making sure we are compliant to the current regulations, but we also follow work done by different agencies on advising how electronic registries should be. You see some keywords here. They are at the core of our development. We want to make it future-proof. There's work being performed on what the new standards for registries should be, and that work is probably coming out later this year. We'll make sure we comply to that. Now, to have the business the ownership registry, you obviously need other components in your system. So just to make sure you know that we are building this on a common platform, which we call Unified Registers Platform. And we have a set of registries out of the box to be chosen by you if you also require other things. But we'd be glad to be a partner of yours for your future developments and making sure your country is fully compliant, and that we will soon forget the existence of gray lists or black lists or any list of that kind. So thank you very much.
Transparency of beneficial ownership is the cornerstone of a robust financial system. Having a beneficial ownership registry system enhances trust, facilitates fair market competition, and deters illicit financial activities. I will reiterate that Mr. Glode has indicated it's not the technology, it is the legal framework, the organization, procedures that will make that technology work as a solution. Thank you for such quite interesting presentation. And this will lead us to our final speaker before we proceed to the Q&A segment. We already know the power of technology, but now let's discuss technical assistance in implementing beneficial ownership transparency. Mr. Stephen Abopiu is the head of technology for Open Ownership, an NGO focused on beneficial ownership transparency in the UK. He leads the work on the Beneficial Ownership Data Standard and the Open Ownership Register, along with a range of other technical products. His presentation will share with us in how jurisdictions implementing beneficial ownership reforms, what they need to think about, how to get usable information so their reforms are effective. Another element that his presentation will be discussing is open ownership and how it has a range of free guidance on implementation and how to collect, publish beneficial ownership information, as well as how their beneficial ownership data standard is being adopted by many countries to make it easier to create usable data, which can be exchanged between countries. We know the power of technology, but we also know the power of data. So I welcome Mr. Stephen.
Thank you, Nilda, and thank you for the invitation and for all the other speakers. Just to echo some of the comments that they've been making, because they're very important for what I'm about to talk about. So LaDonna talked about whether people can know whether your legislation is doing what it's supposed to be doing. Lenny talked about the challenges that come when you change multiple pieces of legislation. Alex talked about the need to be adaptable. And Mindaugas talked about the constantly evolving requirements. And so what I want to share is that my team at Open Ownership has been working since 2017 on beneficial ownership transparency. And we've been publishing information and advice for countries all over the world in exactly those issues, how to implement proper beneficial ownership reforms that can help you realize the changes you've made to your legislation, get hold of information that you can really use, and to make sure that what you have is future-proof and what you have produces some data and information that helps you going forwards. Now, over 150 countries all over the world have committed to beneficial ownership transparency via national commitments or via publishing plans that mean that they want to do more in this space. And I'm happy to say that we have worked with about 40 countries all over the world. And we believe that when we learn those lessons, we publish them all openly. So if you go to openownership.org, you can find a lot of the information about places we've worked with and case studies of people who've done these kind of reforms well. I'm also very happy to say that I have colleagues based in Mexico and in Argentina who are leading our work with places like Turks and Caicos, Honduras, Chile, Trinidad and Tobago, and other countries. So what I want to talk about is some of the things we've learned about from those engagements that we've had, and some of the things that hopefully can help, especially if people in this webinar are looking to make sure that you can comply with all of the standards that have been discussed by other participants. Now, Open Ownership is non-for-profit, as was mentioned earlier, and we offer a range of advice and guidance for people. We have a whole range of implementation advice that's informed by all the work we've done all over the world. For transparency's sake, we are funded by the UK government, the Norwegian government, USAID, the World Bank, and some other organizations. And what they want us to do is to make sure that countries all over the world have the information they need, especially at the start of their implementation journey, to know where they're going, to know what they want to get to, and to realize the value of doing those reforms properly. So we have implementation advice. We also have research where we've looked at areas like public listed companies, investment funds, trusts, and other things that people want to get a better understanding of. And again, all that information is published on our website. And now the important thing for me is that I'm responsible for a lot on the technology side. And so what I want to help people do is put in place the laws, put in place the systems, and get everything that you need so that at the end you get really good quality information and data that you can use, or your financial intelligence units can use, or your law enforcement can use, or anyone who has the right to use that information can make the most of it, can make sure that you're delivering on the policy that you wanted to change, and delivering on the legislation that you are, the policy goals of what you're looking to do. So I'm responsible for the Beneficial Ownership Data Standard and the Open Ownership Register, as mentioned earlier. Now, the data standard is an open standard for data that can be used by anyone all over the world. Any company can take advantage of it. Any country can use it. It's a guide for how to produce high quality data on beneficial ownership, no matter what entities you want to capture, companies, trusts, and no matter what kinds of interest you want to capture. We've been working on it for about 7 years, and we're just about to release a whole new version, which we've been working on for the last 2 years. Now, why is it important to have that? It's important because if you adopt something like our standard, it makes you more adaptable. The standard is set up so that we can capture information on different types of entities. You can capture them on companies, on trusts. You can represent nominee relationships. I know, for example, that Belize has changed regulations just last year to introduce a nominee register. So our standard offers a way that anyone can use and anyone can learn from to create the kind of high quality data that you want, so that you can connect people who are beneficial owners with the entities, be those companies, public listed companies, or arrangements like trusts. And you can build up this understanding of what beneficial ownership structure. Apologies, I think I froze there for a second. You to connect the data and to exchange it between different jurisdictions as well. So if everyone has the same kind of data, then you can better understand your neighbor's data and data from another jurisdiction where you may have connections to it. As like I said, this is something that we publicly make available and anyone can make use of. And I'm very happy to be partnered with organizations like NRD companies who are making use of this data standard. For a bit of context, we're happy to see there's a large number of countries that are making use of our data standard. Just hopefully this is of interest to people in the region, that Canada, the USA and Mexico have all engaged with and are using in various projects our data standard. So Canada has just introduced a public BA register in January, and they are going to be mapping their data to our data standard so they can more easily combine the data they have from the 14 registers that they'll eventually have in Canada. And there's also other work with the anti-corruption team in Mexico that's going on to use our data standard so they can collect data internally. This is a quote from the Canadian government, who talked about the importance of having this kind of standard and the fact that if they collect data in this way, they can more easily exchange it with registries all over the world, and also with registries that are in Canada itself. So why is it really important up front when you're thinking about implementing these changes to think about the high quality data that you want to get at the end? Some of these have already been mentioned by other speakers, but there is a huge push from people like the Financial Action Task Force, the EU, the World Bank and others for adequate, accurate and up-to-date information on beneficial ownership. But unfortunately at the moment, a large number of countries are not living up to that. They're not collecting the data and using the data in an effective way. So FATF in their last round or so far have found that only about 9% of countries are implementing very effective changes in this area. 50% of the jurisdictions that the OECD Global Forum have looked at they're unsatisfied with the availability of ownership information. And the Basel Index has also found that beneficial ownership transparency is one of the big areas. So obviously there's a lot to do. And as we've heard earlier, these standards are getting tougher. FATF has changed their standards on beneficial ownership. The OECD is getting to the end of its current round of evaluation, so there'll be another round coming in a couple of years. So they're asking for more and more information. So it's good to think, how can you prove and how can you show that you have this kind of adequate, accurate and up-to-date information? Another thing to mention is the changing kind of requirements that come with those standards about different entities, different types of organizations you need to capture information on. So countries may just be introducing the need to capture information on trusts, or perhaps you are capturing information on nominees, state-owned enterprises, all these kind of different things. I want to stress here that our data standard allows you to collect information on all of these and to connect it. So if there is a company which holds a role in a trust, and that's allowed in your legislation, our data standard allows you to capture that, to represent that as kind of high quality information that you can use and that anyone that has the right to can make use of. There's also an important thing to say is that a lot of beneficial ownership traditionally has been thought of as ownership. So is there a shareholding or are there voting rights that are involved here? But more and more you see that there's a need to be able to capture types of control. Does this person have significant control over this company or this trust? So there's changing requirements and more information needs to be captured on different types of entities. So it's really important for everyone to know what kinds of information you want to capture, but also, as was mentioned earlier on, to be adaptable, to be able to add things in. So the approach that we have in our standard is that companies, trusts, state-owned enterprises, they're just types of entities. So you can slot them in and you can add new ones to your system without having to kind of change the entire process of the data that you collect. So so as those requirements shift and change in the coming years, it's very important to think about how you're able to be adaptable and how you can capture that kind of information that can push you forwards. It's also worth saying that the better quality data you collect, the more information the better you'll be able to do risk-based assessments and adopt a risk-based approach. So obviously, you need to know what information you want to capture, and then once you've captured the information, the quicker you can move to understanding if there are particular types of entities that are more risky. For example, if those are trust in some instances, or perhaps it's a particular industry that people need to be aware of. In some jurisdictions, it's non-profit organizations where money launderers have taken advantage of them. You need to have that good quality information to be able to know what your risks are. And we work with a huge number of countries, as I was talking about. And one of the very challenging things for our organization is we're currently working with four countries across Africa that are grey listed by FATF. So Kenya, South Africa, Nigeria, and Namibia. And they need to prove effectiveness. They need to prove that they can adopt a risk-based approach. So the faster they can collect information and that they can put that information to use in terms of identifying and zoning in on the risks, the better. And so they have been in this process of very, very rapidly legislating and changing trying to introduce all of the systems, all of the data collection processes, all the registers, all at the same time. And I just want to advise anyone who's here to say that the more time you have, the better. And obviously, if you think up front that you want to get this great information so that you can understand those risks better, then having better quality data will help you do that. I just wanted to share an example as well on the right about the importance of being able to have that information and connect it between different countries, because the example you can see here is from a study that the IMF helped to put out recently, which showed that although people in a particular country and a particular region thought that the risks of the money laundering risks were going down in their country, actually once they connected their data with other people's, they realized it was going up, because there were complexities they were not seeing by just being able to have the information for themselves, but they needed to understand better how to connect it with other jurisdictions. To build on that, not only is it useful to think about how you want to connect the information or understand beneficial ownership, but the new FATF standards make very clear that you need to share that information with your procurement authority. There's obviously a lot of requirements around sanctions and around understanding sanctioned individuals and whether they are beneficial owners of companies. So I advise you, if you want to learn more about these subjects, like these diagrams are taken from projects that my team has delivered. So we've worked with partners from, for example, the Open Contracting Partnership, who do a lot on procurement data, organizations like Open Sanctions that do a lot on sanctions data, and the Global Legal Entity Identifier Foundation, to show how you can connect high quality beneficial ownership information with procurement if you wanted to understand, for example, who the real people are behind bids coming in for public procurement, or if you want to make sure you can identify sanctioned individuals. The better your beneficial ownership data, the easier it will be to connect with those other types of registries and to again achieve the goals that you set out at the start. And building on Mindaugas's point, the better the quality of your data, the more tools which will be available for you to use that data in. There's some examples here of companies that we've worked with, and I can guarantee you that you'll reduce your costs and you will have more options on how you use your information, your beneficial ownership data, if you take into account how you want to use it at the end, and make sure to put in place things that we can advise on and that we have lots of information about on our website, about the important kind of bedrock and the foundations that you need in order to get good quality beneficial ownership data that you can best make use of at the end. So just as a final slide, I just want to say that if you visit the Open Ownership website, you can find out a lot more about all of the topics that I've shared. We have a whole range of briefings and publications, and also my contact details are on there. And so just wanted to say that if you think up front about how to collect high quality standardized beneficial ownership data, it will really pay off in the long run. It will help you to make sure that you're achieving the policy goals you set out at the start. It will reduce the costs of the information you need to produce. Sorry, it will reduce the costs of using that information, and also gives you many more options for how you want to use it. So if you wanted to use it for procurement, if you want to use it for sanctions, if you want to use it to connect with other systems, all of that can be helped by having higher quality data up front. And I hope that our resources will help people and offer some advice in terms of that area, and what things you should watch out for and you should take into account. So thank you very much for inviting me today, and very keen to answer any questions that people have.
Excellent presentation. Thank you, Stephen, for sharing how the beneficial ownership data standard can be adapted to make it easier for us to create usable data, especially as it relates to cross-border data exchange and analysis. I'm sure that participants today learned a lot. And we thank you for sharing all that information with us. We have concluded the presentations, and we have arrived to a very important element in today's agenda, which is the Q&A segment. And we have quite a few questions. So the way we're going to be approaching this is that I'm going to be mentioning the speaker to which the question is being directed. I'm going to mention from who, and then I'm going to proceed to read out the question, and then we will give that opportunity to the speaker to share the response to such questions. There might be some questions, and other speakers can jump in to elaborate or to add to the initial response by the speaker that will be identified. So the first question we have is to Ms. LaDonna Jan from Alicia Nichols. Were the impacts listed by yourself for Belize based on actual measurements, or are they hypothetical? Additionally, does Belize empirically monitor the impacts of these blacklisting exercises?
Thank you, and good morning once again. It's now afternoon in Belize, so thank you for that. The impacts were noted because of several communications received from Belize in terms of international bodies and also for international donors. Belize was required to submit responses and questionnaires to these bodies indicating our legislative amendments, what were our intentions, and also to provide undertakings as to whether or not we would be submitting for a supplementary review, which would in effect lead to the removal from the Annex 1. There were extensive queries and communications sent to Belize about its position, having been adversely listed. So the impacts were from our experiences that happened. They were not hypothetical at all, but rather what we experienced. We are monitoring the impact. That would be done specifically more so within the Ministry of Finance Department. Thank you.
Thanks, Ms. Jan, and I hope that answered the question, Ms. Nichols. We will proceed to the other question, which is directed to Mrs. Lenny Magan from Kyler Jones. Is there the possibility for NAMLAC to include the Belize Port Authority and Belize Coast Guard as Maritime Law Enforcement Department to be part of the committee? I see Customs, Immigration, and Police are included. There's another question from Mr. Kyler, sorry, but I will have you answer that first question, and then we will proceed to the following one.
Thank you. Yes, so it is certainly an interesting suggestion, and I think that's one that we can explore. Ultimately, it would be for the minister that would have to designate another person to be a member of NAMLAC. In this case, it would be the Minister of Finance, but it's something that we can explore in terms of understanding specifically what the functions are. We do have the CEO in the Ministry of Home Affairs, which also covers some additional law enforcement agencies and provides representation in that regard. But we can explore it, and also just thinking further about it we have the National Targeted Financial Sanctions Task Force as well, that is chaired by the Financial Intelligence Unit, which also specifically looks at designations and investigating designations of persons and would look at ships, etc. So I see possible synergies there in terms of the maritime enforcement aspect. So we do appreciate the suggestion and we'll look further into it.
Thanks, Ms. Lenny. The following question from Mr. Jones is, do we have treaty obligation with the EU that states we must comply with their EU compliance standards, or is it the EPA with EU? I don't know, Ms. Magan, if you want to take that one, or another speaker can jump in.
Nilda, let me try to help here on this one. No, I mean, there really no, we don't have any agreement with the EU in terms of this. I said we must comply with these standards. These are not part of any trade agreement or anything like that. This is completely outside of that. I think this more relates to another question that was asked. I think perhaps when we come to that, we can sort of circle back to this so you can understand why I say it's not really part of that, any agreement Belize has with the EU in terms of the EPA or any other, trade agreement.
Yeah. Thanks, Director General Halak. There is one more question that may be related to the same topic, which is from Alicia Nichols. Provocative, but why are our countries jumping through hoops to comply with EU rules when the EU isn't a globally recognized standard setter for tax or AML regulation? Anyone would like to add to that?
I'll jump in here as well, and perhaps the other panelists might want to jump in as they see fit. Look, we all recognize that the EU is not a global standard setter either in the AML CFT space or in terms of tax transparency. And frankly, many countries, such as Belize, who have actually been at the end of the EU stick, if you want to put it that way, have pushed back mightily on that in terms of saying, we do have the global standard setters in this area who set the standards and who actually do their various reviews of us, and they come up with their reviews. But then it also seems that the EU has a parallel process, which in many of our views is somewhat duplicative and in some instance contradictory, and may not achieve the objectives the EU may want to achieve. So we have pushback, and also the EU process, and I think justifiably so, we've often criticized them for how opaque it is. So I think, we can accept that. But then you say, so why do we continue to do it? Well, there are a number of reasons. As I said, while the EU may not be a global standard setter, its regulations or requirements carry significant weight, due to its economic influence. And that's a reality, that's a fact. And, so compliance with these rules, can bring various benefits to countries like Belize, both economically and politically. Of course, look at it in terms of trade benefits. Again, where countries and Belize does have very important trade relations with the EU. Again, complying with EU requirements will certainly help us on that front, because to not comply means that the EU can certainly take countermeasures against us, which would definitely have a detrimental impact. The EU's global influence, again, is not a global standard setter in this space, but its regulations and standards do carry weight in many other fora, such as the OECD, and others that may, and the FATF, that may be the global standard setters, but so they have an important role to play there. And of course, I mentioned political considerations. So those are some of the, in my view, some of the reasons why we do it, how we don't like it. And we think the EU can get better. And I think they started to listen because we have wrongly criticized them, and not only Belize, but many other countries wrongly criticized them for their process. And I think they have met us in, come a long way, we think, from a few years ago, where they seem to be, judge, jury, and executioner roll up in one. So I leave it at that and invite others if they want to jump in on that. Yes.
Thanks, Mr. Halak. I see Mr. Glood has his...
Yes, I would like to react to that as well, because I like the question, especially that it's framed as a provocative question. I would agree. Taxes are far too high in Europe, and there's too many taxes. But I understand the complexity of the question, and Europe sort of imposing its point of view. US does the same. I mean, these are the dominant countries economically, and I would also argue it's not about even the standard, but sometimes it's maybe even about over-regulation. In EU, the big thing now is not so much taxes, because countries that were having issues have been addressed. Countries like Cyprus, countries like Luxembourg, Ireland to a certain extent. I mean, they are fixing. Those countries are no longer tax havens within the European Union. You've seen Bulgaria still on the list, Croatia is still on the list. But now we have a new set of regulations coming around sustainability, a very broad set of regulations that will put additional requirements. So this is definitely something to watch out. The subject we've spoken about today, the beneficiary ownership and all the AML and other regulations, are now becoming part of the sustainability reporting that's becoming obligatory to large companies by the end of this year. To smaller companies, it's a staged introduction, but it's going to be a huge burden to European businesses. And for them to stay competitive, I think some of that will be spilled over to the rest of the world, saying, look, if you want to do business with us, here are our rules. If not, we'll go somewhere else. I know it sounds harsh. I'm myself coming from a very small country. We have very little say within the EU. We also have to comply whatever is decided in Brussels. But from the perspective of where the world economy and the environment is going to, I think we need to address these things. And while at this moment it seems like overregulation, I think we'll learn to live with that.
Thank you, Mr. Glood. Has quite provocative responses. I'm sure that the participants agree. We will proceed to another question, and this one is in relation to the ease of doing business from Cavani Penner, and I think this one is for Director General Claude Halak. Are the FSC and the BCCAR, which is our company's registry, working to improve Belize's global rankings, namely the World Bank's Ease of Doing Business ranking? We are now at 135 among 190 economies as of 2020. And the GDI's Global Entrepreneurship Index, Belize ranked 63 of 137 countries as of 2018. Mr. Penner is asking for some elaboration in this aspect. Mr. Hila.
No, thank you for that, Milda. I don't want to be flippant about this. Is an important question. I mean, yes, frankly, everything that we do in terms of improving the ease of doing business in Belize, the introduction of the OBRS, the Online Business Registry system, where before it would take it could take at least for a domestic company could take upwards of 2 weeks or more to establish a company or legal entity in Belize. And now with the online business registry system, we've gotten it down to within 48 hours. And our goal is to reduce that even further, to have it done within hours once all the necessary things are done. We've also done a number of things on the tax front, not in terms of reducing taxes, but in terms of simplifying taxes. We've also worked with the other, what we call the starting business entity in Belize, to try to work with them, because it's not only from a company perspective to make it easier for people to be able to start and get their businesses up and running. We are constantly in dialogue with the central bank and the domestic banks in terms of what things we can do to lessen the regulatory and the compliance burden. So it is part of our DNA. We want a robust regulatory framework in Belize, but at the same time, we understand that we live in a society where people have to make a living, and the economy has to work, and so we have to ensure, while we protect the system, that we also do not unduly impose unnecessary burdens or regulatory burdens on people. So, if I could leave it at that, yes.
Thanks, DG Halak. I believe that you touch a very key point, the OBRS, which goes back to the power of technology. So we are going to, we have one more question, and this is for Mr. Taymans, or any other speaker that may want to collaborate in the response. This question is from Michelle Hebert. Beneficial ownership disclosure rules are relevant to the rights to privacy and personal data protection. How would it be achieved, or how could it be achieved, a balance between openness and privacy?
Yes, thank you for the question. A difficult one. I remember seeing in Mr. Gloda's presentation some newspaper extracts highlighting this interaction, at times this tension between beneficial ownership, register accessibility, and the right to privacy. I mean, we have seen the judgment of the European Court of Justice last year, which did bring quite some changes. Was it 22? Maybe it was 22. Already, and so this is something that indeed the regulator has been or had been a bit put aside with some legal questions that remained unanswered around the concept of legitimate interest to access the information in terms of the different GDPR conditions for such access and use to this information. I think some work has been done in the context of the new AML package that has been adopted. It's now being fine-tuned and translated in all 27 countries, but you should be able to see that document in the course of summer, where this balance has, the legislator has tried to improve or to clarify this balance between, the need for such information to be accessible to those stakeholders and persons that do have a legitimate interest in accessing this information. And this, points to civil society working in the field of AML, other private businesses that have a legitimate interest to have this information in order, to understand with whom they are dealing with. And here again, we touch upon the benefits of having this information available to a number of stakeholders to ensure, fair competition and market practice. So I think we will see evolution in this in the implementation of this balance. EU member states have been, clarifying this concept of legitimate interest, they will test this legitimate interest before this information is accessed. Now, again, this is a solution that has been found by the legislator. We will see in the course of implementation how eventually the courts might assess this balance. It's always a bit difficult to have a clear-cut opinion before any court or any judge pronounces itself on the question. But certainly some discussions and thoughts in the past years on this question. So hopefully we'll reach this balance by really combining the legislative aspects, the concept of legitimate interest, the objective that we are actually pursuing as nations, and also the technological aspects. I think this is an important part of the question. How do we ensure that this balance is achieved through technological solutions? And we see some practices emerging from member states within the EU. I think this should also be thought about in the context of the reforms related to digital identity and the whole framework that is being set up within the EU. That's also something quite important. It's a bit beyond the topic here, but related to technology. This will really ensure the setting up of a whole ecosystem of systems that will ensure that this balance is enforced and found. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Taymans. I believe that Mr. Glodas, you had shared a poll when you did your presentation.
Yes, indeed I did. And I had meant at the end to look at it, but unfortunately I forgot. But now I did, and it's very interesting. I think it's really worth looking at because it started as, yes, it's being collected and registered, close to 90%. Over time, it went down to 73%. But quite frankly, I think it's a very good news, yet it could be a little bit misleading. I remember a discussion we had in CRF, which is Corporate Registers Forum, where a number of registrar institutions are gathering every year. And obviously, most of them in their given jurisdictions are responsible for collecting this data. They had a discussion that, yes, we do. However, that's not the way it should be done. Most interestingly, it was the comment from the UK Companies House, where the gentleman, I forgot his name, but he said that we were forced to look into our beneficiary ownership data when the war broke out, when Russia attacked Ukraine. And because there was so much economic interest of Russian oligarchs in the UK, that was a known fact. They decided to see how they can apply sanction lists. They went to look into beneficiary ownership data, and they said openly, they were very surprised. 99% of that was completely useless and irrelevant, and they need to take actions, and they did, to fix that. Stefan might be actually have even some more information or want to comment on that, but that was a surprising fact to me. And when we have now a number of discussions across the Caribbean Africa, even in our home country and in Europe and in Southeast Asia. Yes, some of that data is being collected, but not the way it needs to be collected today, or nothing is being done with that data, and certainly not the way it needs to be collected tomorrow. Stefan, would you like to step in? I'm pushing you a little bit, but if you don't want to, you don't have to.
No, sure. I'm happy to speak. So, Mindaugas is right. The UK authorities created what was called the Register of Overseas Entities very quickly following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. All of the information and data is publicly available, and a huge amount of work from law enforcement, from people at the register, investigative journalists, and everyone has used that to identify information and property in the UK that was owned by sanctioned individuals. There's still challenges because in that information, it was found that about 30% of the beneficial owners are companies who are perhaps based in the British Virgin Islands or based in other places that aren't as transparent about their information, or that they are owned by trusts. And so there are challenges that the UK authorities are looking at and are working at around that. But yeah, the people from Companies House have said they were able to get to understanding and knowing about all those problems a lot faster because the information was public and because people could make use of it in multiple ways.
Thank you. And I believe that we have come to the end of our Q&A segment. It's been a pleasure to join you all today and moderate such informative discussions. Today's discussions and expert presentations address the economic, financial, and even societal impacts of being designated as a high-risk jurisdiction, and also how to avoid that infamous blacklist. We explored how technology can assist in helping jurisdictions to be compliant, and for us to understand the importance of beneficial ownership data, especially for cross-border data exchange and analysis. Just to reiterate that we will be sharing the presentations and recordings. And even though the Q&A segment has come to an end, if you have additional questions, feel free to send us an email and we will try our best to provide responses or elaborate on information that may be required to address those questions. The recordings and presentations will be available at FSC's website as of next week. All those who are registered will receive a separate email and reminder for that specific element. So again, thanks to our speakers, to our experts who agreed to join us today. And thanks to everyone for participating. I hope that it was as insightful as it was for me as the moderator. So thanks again for the opportunity. And I hope you have an amazing rest of the day. Enjoy.